Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, and everything that makes modern life feel normal has disappeared. No electricity, no running water, no refrigerator, no supermarket, no hospital, no antibiotics, no cold weather clothing, no sealed windproof house, no phone to call someone for help. You step outside. The cold air immediately cuts into your skin. The wind blows straight through your thin clothing. The ground is hard as stone. Somewhere beyond your sight, a sound comes from the bushes. You don't know whether it's a small animal or something large enough to kill you. You begin to feel hungry, but there is no store just a few minutes walk away. If you want to eat, you have to find food. If you want to drink, you have to find water. If you want to survive the night, you have to build shelter before the temperature drops even further. And if you get injured, no one is coming. No ambulance. No emergency room. No medicine waiting in a cabinet. There is only you, your body, what you know, and the people standing beside you. So, how long would you survive? 1 day, 1 week, or until your first winter? Today, we often look at prehistoric life as something distant. A few people dressed in animal skins, a fire, a spear, a mammoth somewhere in the distance. But for the humans who actually lived in that world, this wasn't an adventure. It was everyday life. One night that was too cold could kill a child. One failed hunt could force an entire group to share the last of their food. A small cut could become infected. A roar in the darkness could keep everyone awake all night. And the strangest thing is, humans were never born looking like a species destined to dominate the planet. We aren't as fast as antelopes. We aren't as strong as bears. We don't have teeth like lions. We don't have the thick fur of animals that live in cold climates. No claws, no armored skin, no venom. A human standing alone in the wilderness is surprisingly fragile. So why are we still here? Why not the cave lions? Why not the mammoths? Why not the predators that were bigger, stronger, and far better equipped than we were? How did a nearly naked primate walk out of Africa, cross deserts, mountains, forests, grasslands, brutal winters, and eventually appear on nearly every habitable continent on Earth? The answer doesn't lie in a single invention. It wasn't just fire. It wasn't just the spear. It wasn't just a large brain. Our ancestors survived through a series of solutions that were sometimes extraordinarily harsh. They turned dead animals into clothing. They smashed bones open to reach what was hidden inside. They transformed the skeletons of enormous animals into building materials. They tracked prey for hours until its body could no longer keep running. And when winter took away almost every other option, they learned how to extract every last bit of energy the world still had to offer. But the deeper we go into these survival methods, the more we begin to realize something. The most frightening thing isn't what humans did. It's what the world forced them to become in order to stay alive. And the story begins with a problem so simple that most of us barely think about it anymore. How do you keep a nearly hairless body warm? In a world so cold that sleeping in the wrong place for just one night could mean never waking up again. Imagine yourself on an afternoon tens of thousands of years ago. The sun is going down. So is the temperature. In front of you lies the body of an animal that has just been killed. Maybe it's a reindeer, a wild horse, or some other large animal that lived on the cold steppe. There is still warmth in its body. Its blood hasn't completely frozen yet. And in the modern world, the first reaction for most of us would probably be to step back. But for someone living in the cold climates of prehistory, what lies in front of them isn't just food. It's meat. It's fat, it's sinew, it's bone, and most importantly, it's a layer of skin that could determine who survives the night. Humans have a very strange evolutionary problem. Our bodies are extremely efficient at releasing heat when we're active. We have large numbers of sweat glands operating across most of the surface of our skin. That's incredibly useful when you're running in hot weather. But when temperatures fall dramatically exposed, skin becomes a weakness. Unlike many animals that live in cold environments, humans don't have a thick enough coat of fur to create a natural barrier of insulation. And once body temperature begins to fall, things can go wrong very quickly. First comes shivering, then clumsiness. The ability to use your hands begins to decline. Your ability to think clearly declines as well. A person begins making bad decisions at exactly the moment when they most need to stay alert. Eventually, the body can no longer preserve enough heat for its vital organs. That's why clothing isn't simply a convenience. For human groups moving into colder climates, it may have been one of the most important survival technologies ever developed. Before woven fabric, before wool, before cotton, the world already provided an insulating material. It was lying on the bodies of other animals: skin, fur, fat. Our ancestors could remove animal hides and use them as protection against wind and cold. But there was a problem. A piece of animal hide doesn't naturally become a coat. If you simply drape it over your shoulders, it can slip. Wind can enter from every direction. It gets in the way when you run. It doesn't protect your arms very well. It doesn't protect your legs very well. And in truly cold climates, even small gaps can allow enormous amounts of heat to escape. This is where one of the smallest objects in archaeology becomes incredibly important: a needle. Not a metal needle, a bone needle. Archaeologists have discovered eyed bone needles at numerous Paleolithic sites. Some famous discoveries come from Siberia and areas associated with Denisova Cave. Archaeological evidence suggests that once humans were capable of making needles small and precise enough to sew materials together, clothing could become much more closely fitted to the body. And that change may seem small, but its consequences could have been enormous, because closely fitted clothing traps a layer of warm air more effectively. Trousers could protect the legs, hoods could protect the head. Multiple layers of hide could be worn on top of one another. Parts of the body that had once been directly exposed to freezing winds could now be covered. In other words, humans didn't have to wait for evolution to grow us a new coat of fur. We created one. This may be one of the clearest moments, revealing what makes humans so remarkable. Most living creatures adapt to their environments through their bodies. If a cold climate persists for long enough, natural selection may favor traits that help them retain heat more effectively. But humans have another path. We can change what exists between our bodies and the environment: a piece of animal hide, a strand of sinew, a bone needle. Three things that seem incredibly simple, but when combined, they can become a technology powerful enough to open entire regions of the planet that our original bodies were never designed to inhabit. Anthropologists propose that this is part of the process through which humans became a cultural animal, a creature that adapts not only through genes but through knowledge that is learned and passed down. A child doesn't have to invent clothing for itself. It is born into a group that already knows how to make it. It doesn't have to discover which kinds of hide provide the best insulation. Adults can show them. It doesn't have to spend an entire lifetime discovering how to seal the wrists or ankles against the cold. The technique already existed before that child was born. This represents a fundamental change, because from that point forward, each generation no longer had to start from zero. But clothing solved only one problem: keeping warm. And when you live in a cold climate, keeping warm costs the body energy, a lot of energy. You can wear animal hides. You can sit beside a fire. You can sleep inside a shelter. But if your body doesn't have enough fuel, all of those things merely extend the amount of time before you collapse. And that's when our ancestors began searching for calories in a place many people today wouldn't even want to look: not on the meat, but deep inside the bones. Because when the best meat was already gone, sometimes the meal still wasn't over. Imagine a hunting site after everything is over. The animal lies motionless on the ground. The soft meat has already been cut away. The easiest parts to eat have been carried back. To most of us today, the skeleton left behind would look like waste. But to prehistoric humans, it could still contain one of the most valuable sources of energy in the entire meal: marrow, and, sometimes, brain. In cold conditions, these weren't just foods, they were fuel. 1 gram of fat provides roughly 9 kilocalories, far more than protein or carbohydrates. That makes fat an extremely valuable source of energy when the body has to remain highly active while also maintaining its core temperature in a cold environment. The problem is that the lean meat we usually imagine when we think about hunting wasn't always enough. If a diet became too heavily dependent on protein while lacking sufficient fat, the body could struggle to meet its energy demands. Current research indicates that hunter-gatherer groups living in harsh environments often weren't interested only in muscle meat. They sought fat, organs, marrow, energy-rich parts that a modern person might overlook. And archaeological evidence shows that this isn't simply speculation. At many prehistoric sites, researchers have discovered animal bones bearing signs of deliberate breakage, not random fractures, not damage caused by time, but marks indicating that a hard object had been struck against specific places repeatedly in order to break the bone open. Picture the scene. A long bone is placed on a stone surface. Someone holds a large rock. The first blow makes the bone vibrate. The second creates a fracture. The third breaks through the hard outer layer, and inside is fat-rich marrow, something that could be completely overlooked if you only looked at the bone from the outside. This is what makes this behavior more interesting than simply a story of brutal survival. It reveals a very specific kind of understanding of the world. A person sees a bone, but they know there is something valuable inside it. In other words, they aren't merely reacting to what their eyes can see. They're acting on knowledge of something hidden from view. That's an important cognitive step. Cause and effect, memory, planning, tool use. A bone is no longer simply a bone. It becomes a container, an object that can be opened to extract the resource hidden inside. And this may also help explain why ancient humans were able to exploit animal carcasses so efficiently. An animal didn't provide only meat. It could provide fat, marrow, sinew, hide, bone, brain. Each part had a different value. Each part could serve a different purpose. At some level, this is almost similar to the way we look at a machine. We don't just see the object as a whole. We understand that the individual parts inside it have different functions and different values. And when food becomes scarce, that way of seeing the world becomes a matter of survival. There were times of the year when hunts failed, times when animal herds moved far away, times when soft meat could be consumed or spoil more quickly. Under those circumstances, bone marrow could become an energy reserve protected inside a hard shell of bone. Archaeological evidence suggests that breaking bones to extract marrow appeared very early in hominin behavior. That means this wasn't some rare innovation invented by a single group of people. It may have been an ancient part of our ancestors' food exploitation strategies, but the story doesn't end there. Because animal skulls could also be broken open, and inside the skull is another tissue rich in fat, the brain. Today, the idea may make many people uncomfortable. But that's exactly the problem with judging the past by the emotional standards of the present. Someone standing in the middle of winter doesn't ask, "Does this taste good?" They ask, "Can this keep me alive for one more day?" And sometimes that question alone is enough to change every choice you make. But perhaps the most remarkable thing here is that ancient humans didn't simply consume whatever was easy to reach. They invested effort in extracting valuable resources that were hidden away. That required knowledge, tools, technique, and time. A stone used correctly to break a bone could produce food. Used incorrectly, it could crush everything or injure you. Perhaps this skill too had to be learned, observed, passed down. A young person watches an adult, learns how to position the bone, learns where to strike, learns which parts are worth the effort. And once again, we see a pattern emerging. Survival didn't exist only in the body. It existed in knowledge. But if bones could provide food, why stop at food? If an enormous animal left behind bones weighing dozens of kilograms, long tusks, massive jaws, then to a mind capable of seeing materials differently, a skeleton could become much more. In cold regions where wood wasn't always readily available, the bones of enormous animals could become part of the house itself. Imagine a plain so vast that the horizon seems almost endless. Wind sweeps across the ground. Trees are scarce. The cold season lasts for months. And if you want to build a shelter strong enough to withstand the wind, you can't simply walk into a forest and cut down timber, because there may be no forest nearby. But across that landscape, there is something else. Enormous. Heavy. And when it dies, it leaves behind an almost unimaginable amount of material. Mammoths? Today, we often think of mammoths as animals hunted for meat. But to prehistoric humans, their value may have extended far beyond food. Hide could provide covering. Tusks could be worked into useful forms. Bones could become tools. And in some communities, their skeletons could even become part of the architecture. At sites across Eastern Europe, archaeologists have discovered circular or roughly circular structures made from large quantities of mammoth bones. One of the most famous sites is Mezhyrich in what is now Ukraine. Their mammoth jaws, skulls, long bones, and tusks were arranged into organized structures. Archaeological evidence suggests that these bones may have been combined with animal hides and other materials to create relatively sturdy shelters. The important thing here is that we shouldn't imagine ancient humans simply sleeping inside a skeleton. The reality is far more interesting, because a structure like this requires many things to happen before anyone can step inside and sleep. Bones have to be collected, transported, arranged, selected according to size, placed in specific positions. A framework may have needed to be constructed. It may have needed to be covered with hides. Wind had to be considered. Fire had to be considered. Entrances and exits had to be considered. That's planning. And planning is a profound cognitive ability. It means that a group of humans could look at materials scattered across the ground and imagine something that didn't yet exist: a shelter, a warmer space, a boundary between inside and outside, between a place humans could control and the wild world beyond it. This was an important step in the way humans changed their relationship with the environment. Instead of simply searching for natural caves, humans increasingly gained the ability to create caves of their own, not out of stone, but out of whatever the landscape provided. And if what the landscape provided happened to be the remains of enormous animals, then those remains became building materials. But the story of mammoth bone dwellings raises another question. Where did all those bones come from? We can't always know for certain. Some may have come from animals that were hunted. Some may have been collected from animals that died naturally. Some may have been reused from older bone accumulations. Anthropologists propose several possibilities, and not every bone structure necessarily had the same origin. But regardless of where the bones came from, using them in such large quantities shows that prehistoric humans understood their material value remarkably well. And think about this from the perspective of a child growing up within such a group. That child might grow up inside a house built from the bones of the largest animal they had ever seen. A mammoth skull was no longer something frightening. It became a wall. A tusk was no longer simply part of an animal's body. It became part of a frame. A skeleton no longer represented death. It became something that protected life. That is a profoundly human reversal. We look at something that has died and ask what else it can still do. But we shouldn't confuse this ingenuity with an easy life. A good shelter only mattered if the group could still find food. And on the cold steppe, food sometimes had 4 legs, powerful muscles, better senses than you, and the ability to run so fast that you might never even get close. So how does a slower creature hunt an animal that is faster? The answer may lie in one of the greatest paradoxes of the human body. We aren't exceptional sprinters. But when the race lasts long enough, everything begins to change. Imagine standing beneath a sun so hot that the ground seems to shimmer in front of your eyes. Ahead of you is an antelope. It's lighter, faster, its reflexes are better. And just seconds after detecting danger, it bolts away. You run after it. Immediately, the distance begins to grow. 20 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters, then it disappears behind the bushes. If this were a race of speed, you've already lost. In fact, you never had a chance. But the hunter doesn't stop. He walks to the place where the animal had just been standing, looks down at the ground. A hoof print, a broken branch, a patch of dust that has just been disturbed. A trace so subtle that an untrained person might walk straight past it without ever noticing. He looks ahead, then starts running again. Because this hunt was never a competition to see who could run faster. It was a competition to see who could keep going longer. This is the idea behind a strategy known as persistence hunting, and it relies on something rather unusual about the human body. We are relatively poor sprinters. No human can outrun a healthy horse over a short distance. No human can catch an antelope through speed alone. But the human body has a combination of traits that makes us particularly effective at releasing heat during prolonged physical activity under certain conditions. Humans have large numbers of eccrine sweat glands distributed across most of the body's surface. As body temperature rises, sweat evaporates from the skin and carries heat away. We also have relatively little body hair compared with many mammals. That makes evaporative cooling more efficient. It's important not to say that other animals can't sweat. Some can. Horses are an obvious example. But different species regulate heat in different ways. And under the right environmental conditions, the human ability to dissipate heat can provide a significant advantage during prolonged exertion. The prey runs. It creates distance. Then it stops. The hunter keeps coming. The animal runs again, then stops. The hunter appears again. Every time this happens, the animal has to accelerate. Its muscles generate heat. It has to find a way to release that heat. Meanwhile, the hunter behind it doesn't have to be faster. He simply has to keep coming. Imagine this experience from the prey's perspective. You run away from a slow-moving creature. You leave it far behind. You stop. Then a few minutes later, it appears. You run again. Once again, you leave it behind. You stop. And then it appears again. Not fast, not strong, just unwilling to disappear. Under the right conditions, this process can push an animal toward exhaustion or overheating. But persistence hunting isn't some universal human superpower, nor should we assume that every prehistoric human group hunted this way. Anthropologists have documented forms of persistence hunting among certain hunter-gatherer communities, most famously in cases recorded in southern Africa. Those observations provide a model that can help researchers think about how human endurance may have been exploited in the past. But the importance of persistence hunting in human evolution remains debated, and perhaps the most fascinating part isn't the running. It's what happens inside the hunter's mind. Because once the animal disappears from sight, the hunt becomes a puzzle. Which tracks are fresh? Where did the animal turn? Is it running or walking? Did it merge with another herd? Do these tracks belong to the animal being hunted or to another individual? Rocky ground may not preserve clear footprints. Grass can hide them, wind can erase them, other animals can cross the trail. The hunter has to read the landscape as a sequence of information. A branch slightly out of place, a stone recently overturned, an incomplete hoofprint, fresh dung, the direction of the wind, the position of the sun, the prey's usual behavior. All of these clues are assembled into a story about a creature that is no longer visible. It's almost a form of investigation. The hunter looks at evidence in the present to reconstruct an event in the past, and then predict where the animal will appear in the future. And that is an extraordinary cognitive ability. A footprint isn't the animal itself, but it represents the animal. A footprint pointing north can cause the hunter to imagine a creature hundreds of meters away that he cannot actually see. That requires memory, reasoning, navigation, knowledge of animal behavior, and perhaps the ability to pass that knowledge on to others. An experienced hunter may know things a younger hunter doesn't. When the animal will seek shade, whether it tends to run toward water or avoid it, how its footprints change when it becomes tired, when to run, when to walk, when to stop. So, the real weapon behind persistence hunting isn't just the legs, it's the combination of body and brain. Physiology allows humans to keep going, but cognition tells them which direction to keep going. This is a pattern we've already seen again and again. A bone needle can't save anyone on its own if no one knows how to use it. Mammoth bones don't turn themselves into shelter. A stone doesn't extract marrow by itself, and legs don't hunt prey on their own. Everything becomes technology only when a brain understands how to use it. But even the greatest hunter eventually encounters a limit. You can track an animal, you can run for hours, you can carry meat back to camp, but you can't hunt something that isn't there. And when the climate changes, when the cold season lasts longer, when herds migrate, when plants stop growing, an entire survival strategy can collapse. Because there is one enemy you cannot exhaust. You cannot outrun it. You cannot stab it with a spear. You cannot frighten it away with fire. You can only try to survive long enough for it to pass. Winter. Winter begins before the snow falls. It begins when the world gradually stops giving you the things you need. The days grow shorter, temperatures fall, plants change, some food sources disappear, animal herds move, water freezes, the wind becomes more dangerous. And every day your body has to spend energy simply to keep its internal temperature stable enough to continue functioning. This is one of the easiest things to overlook when we imagine life during the Ice Age. Cold didn't merely make humans uncomfortable, it changed the entire energy equation. You have to stay warm, but to stay warm you need calories. To get calories, you have to find food. To find food, you have to step out into the cold. And the more active you become, the more energy you burn. It's a brutal cycle. A failed meal doesn't just leave you hungry. It can leave your body less capable of fighting the cold that very night. And this is why fat becomes so important. Meat is usually the first image that comes to mind when we think about hunter-gatherers. But in harsh environments, not every calorie has the same value. Fat has a very high energy density. And a body fighting against the cold requires enormous amounts of energy. That could make the fattier parts of an animal particularly valuable. Marrow, subcutaneous fat, certain organs, tissues that modern people might not consider the most appealing parts of a meal. For prehistoric humans, they may have been among the first things worth seeking out. But fat had another use. It could produce light. Step inside a Paleolithic cave. Don't stay near the entrance. Go deeper, beyond the point where sunlight can reach, through corridors of stone, till you turn around and can no longer see the way out. Here, darkness isn't like the darkness in your bedroom. There are no streetlights shining through a window, no screen, no switch. If the flame goes out, you may not even be able to see your own hand. So, how were Stone Age humans able to travel deep into caves like Lascaux and create images on walls far beyond the reach of natural light? Part of the answer is artificial illumination. Archaeological evidence shows that Paleolithic humans used different sources of light, including torches and stone lamps fueled by animal fat. Such a lamp could be remarkably simple: a depression in a stone, fat, a material used as a wick, a small flame. But think about what that means. A part of an animal's body that once provided energy for life could now provide energy for light. Humans had learned how to turn calories into fire, and by doing so, they could push the boundary of the visible world deeper into the darkness. A small lamp didn't merely allow you to see, it changed where you could exist. It allowed tools to be repaired after sunset. It allowed people to interact in darkness. And inside caves, it opened spaces that the human body could never have used without technology. But what about the winter outside? What happens when the problem isn't just one cold night, but weeks or months of scarcity? This is where we enter one of the most controversial hypotheses about hominin survival. At Cima de los Huesos in Spain, researchers have studied the skeletons of hominins who lived hundreds of thousands of years ago. Some researchers have proposed that abnormalities or physiological signs observed in the bones could be connected to periods of seasonal stress. From this emerged a striking hypothesis. Could some ancient hominins have experienced a dramatically reduced metabolic state resembling a form of torpor or a hibernation-like state? The idea sounds almost like science fiction. A group of humans curled up inside a shelter. Activity decreases. Metabolism slows. The body attempts to consume less energy until better conditions return. But this is where we have to be extremely cautious. There is no conclusive evidence that ancient humans actually hibernated like bears. The hypothesis remains controversial. The signs observed in the bones may have other explanations, and human physiology raises major questions about the possibility of prolonged hibernation. So the story isn't ancient humans hibernated. The more accurate story is, some researchers have raised the possibility that these hominins may have experienced a form of seasonal physiological stress or an unusual metabolic state, but that interpretation has not reached scientific consensus. And it's precisely that uncertainty that makes the question so fascinating, because it reminds us how little we still know about the limits our ancestors' bodies may once have endured. Bones can survive for hundreds of thousands of years, but hunger doesn't fossilize. Cold doesn't fossilize. The fear of realizing that food is running out doesn't fossilize. The moment when a family realizes that spring is still far away leaves no direct trace in the ground. We see only the fragments that remain: a smashed bone, a needle, a stone lamp, a shelter structure. And then we try to reconstruct an entire life from those fragments. But among all this evidence, there is something even stranger. If life was so harsh that every calorie mattered, if an injured person couldn't hunt, couldn't run, couldn't find enough food on their own, then what happened to them? According to the coldest logic of survival, they should have disappeared. But sometimes they didn't. Some skeletons show that humans survived long enough for severe injuries to begin healing. And that opens a question that may be more important than every spear, every fire, and every bone needle. Who kept them alive? Imagine a hunt that goes wrong. It isn't the animal that dies. It's the hunter who falls. Maybe his foot slips on a rock. Maybe an impact breaks a bone. Maybe an animal turns around and attacks. You're still alive. But when you try to stand, your leg can no longer support your body weight. In the modern world, an injury like this could send you to a hospital. You get an X-ray. The bone is immobilized. You receive pain relief. Someone brings you food. You can lie still for weeks while your body repairs itself. But take all of that away. No hospital, no modern painkillers, no antibiotics, no clean bed, no food delivered to you every day. And more importantly, your group still has to keep moving. They still have to hunt, still have to find water, still have to gather firewood, still have to protect the children. You're not just injured. You become a survival problem for the people around you. Every piece of meat you eat is a piece of meat someone else has to find. Every day you can't walk is another day the entire group may have to move more slowly. If predators appear, you may be the one who can't run. If food sources disappear, you may be the one who can't help find new ones. According to an extremely simplified version of survival of the fittest, we might think the answer is obvious. The weak die, the strong continue. But the archaeological record makes the story far more complicated. Researchers have discovered hominin skeletons bearing evidence of serious injuries or pathological conditions that those individuals survived long enough for their bodies to begin healing. One of the most frequently discussed examples is Shanidar 1, a Neanderthal individual discovered in Shanidar Cave in Iraq. This individual had multiple injuries and physical abnormalities. The precise interpretation of the extent of the disability and the amount of care this individual required is still debated. But the case contributes to a much larger question. How could individuals with serious injuries survive in such a harsh environment? Archaeological evidence suggests that in at least some cases, hominins survived long enough after significant injuries for healing to take place. And if someone couldn't function normally but still survived, one possibility becomes difficult to ignore. They received some level of support from others, maybe food, maybe protection, maybe help moving, maybe simply being allowed to continue sharing the group's resources. We can't look at a skeleton and know who brought food to whom. We can't know how long a mother sat beside an injured person. We can't know who supported them as the group moved. Those actions don't fossilize, but their consequences can sometimes leave traces. A person continues to live. And that forces us to reconsider one of the most common images of the prehistoric world. We often imagine survival as an individual competition. The stronger one wins. The weaker one is eliminated. But for a group-living species like humans, fitness can be far more complicated. An individual injured today may once have been the group's best hunter. An older person who can no longer run quickly may know where to find water. They may remember the migration routes of animal herds. They may know which plants are edible. They may know how to make tools that younger people haven't yet mastered. They may remember what happened during a previous brutal winter. A weakening body doesn't mean a useless mind. And this is where cooperation changes the entire equation. Imagine two groups. The first group keeps only individuals who can contribute immediately. When someone is injured, they're left behind. When older people can no longer hunt effectively, their knowledge disappears with them. When a mother struggles, her child depends on one person alone. The second group operates differently. They share food. They care for children. They help the injured. Older people pass down knowledge. Multiple individuals work together to protect vulnerable members. In the short term, the second group appears to pay a price. They share calories, they share time, they share risk. But in the long term, they also preserve experience. They preserve skills. They preserve relationships. And they preserve more individuals who may be able to contribute again in the future. Anthropologists propose that a high degree of social cooperation was an important part of humanity's evolutionary success. Not because humans have always been kind. Our history clearly tells us otherwise. Humans can compete, be violent, exclude others, and fight one another, but at the same time, we have an extraordinary capacity to cooperate on a remarkable scale and with remarkable flexibility. We share food with people who didn't directly obtain it. We care for dependent children for years. We pass skills down across generations, and sometimes we support people who are temporarily unable to care for themselves. This turns something invisible into a survival technology. The social network. A spear can be lost. A needle can break. A fire can go out. But if you belong to a group, you have more than one body, more than one pair of eyes, more than one pair of hands, more than one memory. One person sleeps, another keeps watch. One person is injured, another hunts. One person doesn't know how to process a hide, another can teach them. One person dies, but if they passed on their knowledge beforehand, a part of them continues to function within the group. And that final point leads us to a survival method that leaves almost no fossil trace. No bone preserves its shape. No stone tool can allow us to hear it. And yet it may be one of the most powerful inventions humans have ever possessed. Storytelling. Night falls. A group of people sits around a fire. Beyond the circle of light, the landscape nearly disappears. A child is listening. That child has never seen a lion attack, never lived through the harshest winter, never crossed the valley on the other side of the mountains, never eaten the wrong poisonous plant, and yet the child can know that all of those things are dangerous. How? Because someone else experienced them and told the story. This is one of the strangest things about being human. We don't necessarily have to experience a danger ourselves in order to learn from it. An animal attacks you. If you survive, you learn. But with language, an animal can attack someone else, and you still learn. Think about the advantage that creates. Someone returns to camp and says there is a predator near the northern water source. Immediately, people who have never even seen that predator can change their behavior. Someone discovers a plant that makes them sick. That information can spread. Others don't have to poison themselves to learn the same lesson. A hunter discovers a route through the mountains. The route can be described. Someone survives a storm. The experience can be retold. With language, an individual's experience can become the property of the entire group. And if that information continues to be passed on, it can become the property of people who haven't even been born yet. Anthropologists propose that oral traditions in many societies can play a role in preserving ecological knowledge, social rules, information about landscapes, and collective memory. We have to be careful here. We can't look at a modern traditional story and simply assume that it is identical to stories told tens of thousands of years ago. Languages change, cultures change, myths change. But the deeper principle remains extremely important. Humans have the ability to encode information in narrative. And narrative has a special advantage. It's memorable. Try memorizing a list of 20 random rules. Then try remembering a story in which a character breaks those rules and suffers the consequences. The human brain is often highly responsive to characters, causes, conflict, threats, consequences. A structured story transforms dry information into a sequence of events, and that can make knowledge easier to transmit. Imagine a simple warning: don't go to that place during the rainy season. It might be forgotten, but if that warning becomes a story about someone who went there, about the rising water, about what happened, about the person who never returned, the information now carries emotion. It has imagery. It has consequences. It becomes harder to forget. This may be one of the bridges between survival knowledge and mythology. Not every myth is a survival guide, and it would be a mistake to reduce religion or mythology to nothing more than a survival manual. But stories can carry multiple layers of meaning at the same time. A story can be about ancestors, about morality, about identity, and at the same time it can contain information about a place, a season, an animal, or a danger. This creates an ability that genes don't have. Genes transmit biological information from one generation to the next. But that process is slow. If an environment changes within a single generation, DNA can't hold a meeting and immediately update the body. Culture can move faster. One person invents a new technique. Someone else observes it. By the next day, two people know it. They teach the children. A generation later, that technique may become something that everyone knows. This is cumulative culture. Knowledge isn't simply copied. It can be improved. One person makes a bone needle. Another makes it thinner. Someone else finds a better way to drill the eye. One person builds a shelter. Another changes the way the frame is arranged. One person notices a footprint. Another learns how to distinguish a fresh track from an old one. Each generation can begin where the previous generation ended, and that is an enormous advantage. Because an individual human isn't particularly frightening, put one person without tools in the wilderness. And many animals have obvious advantages. But a human being is never truly just one individual. Inside their mind may exist the knowledge of their parents, their grandparents, the hunters who came before them, the toolmakers who came before them, people who died before they were even born. One person walks into winter, but carries the memory of many winters. One person hunts an animal, but carries the experience of hundreds of hunts that came before. A child looks into the fire and learns techniques that may have been passed down through more generations than they could ever count. In that sense, the dead continue helping the living survive, not through magic, but through information. And when we look at it this way, the entire story begins to change. Perhaps the most powerful survival method our ancestors possessed was never the darkest one. Not smashing bones, not wrapping themselves in animal hides, not chasing an animal until it collapsed from exhaustion. The most powerful method may have been the ability to transform one individual's experience into the knowledge of an entire community. And that brings us to the final question. If humans aren't the fastest species, aren't the strongest, don't have the largest fangs, and don't have bodies best adapted to the cold, then, in the end, why were we the ones who survived? Humanity's most powerful weapon was never in our hands. Look back at everything we've just seen. A dead animal, humans take its hide, and turn that hide into clothing. A bone that seems useless. Humans smash it open and discover energy inside. A mammoth skeleton lying on the steppe. Humans look at it and see building material. An antelope that is far faster than we are. Humans don't try to become faster. We change the rules of the hunt. We turn it into a battle of endurance. Darkness prevents us from venturing deep into a cave. We turn fat into light. An injured person can't hunt. Others can share their food. One person learns something important. Language allows them to pass it on to others. There is a pattern running through all of this. Humans constantly encounter a limitation and find a way around it. We don't have fur. Create a layer of fur outside the body. No claws. Pick up a stone. No long fangs. Create a sharp point. Can't run fast, run far. Can't see in the dark, carry fire. Can't know everything on our own, learn from others. This may be the deepest part of the story of human evolution. We often ask what makes humans special: a large brain, language tools, fire cooperation. Perhaps the answer doesn't lie in any single one of these things. Perhaps it lies in our ability to connect them all. Hands create the tool. The brain imagines the tool. Language explains how to use it. The community passes on the technique. The next generation improves it. Then the process repeats. Current research indicates that social learning and cumulative culture have played particularly important roles in the success of Homo sapiens. And that allows us to do something very different from most other living creatures. We can adapt faster than our bodies can change. When the weather turns cold, we don't have to wait thousands of generations to grow thick fur. We make clothing. When a new environment contains different prey, we don't have to wait for our teeth to change. We change our tools. When we enter an unfamiliar landscape, we learn, we share, we remember. And eventually, we turn an unfamiliar place into home. Perhaps that's why the image of survival of the fittest can sometimes cause us to misunderstand the past. Fittest doesn't necessarily mean strongest. It doesn't necessarily mean most aggressive. In evolution, what matters is being well-suited enough to the circumstances to survive and reproduce. And, for humans, the ability to adapt may not exist only within individual bodies. It exists between us, in shared knowledge, in tools, in cooperation, in memory, in culture. And that leads us to a beautiful paradox. This video began with survival methods that seemed dark. The hide of a dead animal, bones smashed open, enormous skeletons turned into building materials, hunts that continued until the prey was exhausted. But the deeper we went, the less this story became about death, and the more it became about something else. The ability to keep life going. Because in the end, our ancestors didn't defeat nature. They learned how to live within it. They learned how to read it. They learned how to take materials from it. They learned how to predict it. And most importantly, They learned how to pass those lessons on to the next person. Now, let's return to the room where this story began. You wake up. The room is warm. You turn on the light, open the refrigerator, put on a coat, pour yourself a glass of water. You probably don't think of any of those actions as having anything to do with survival, but look more closely. Your coat is answering the same question that an animal hide answered tens of thousands of years ago. How do we keep heat around the body? Your house is solving the same problem that a prehistoric shelter once solved. How do we create a safe zone between the body and the environment outside? Your refrigerator is solving a problem our ancestors struggled with for an incredibly long time. How do we preserve food long enough to make sure there's still something to eat tomorrow? Electric light is simply an extraordinarily advanced answer to a very ancient question. How do we push the darkness farther away? We never stopped surviving. We simply became so good at it that most of the time we no longer realize we're doing it. And perhaps that's why a tiny bone needle can be so important. Look at it. And you're not just looking at an artifact. You're looking at a moment when a human being faced a problem. They were cold. A piece of hide wasn't good enough. And somewhere in their mind, an idea appeared. There has to be a better way. They tried. Maybe they failed. They tried again. Eventually, they found something that worked. Then someone else saw it, learned it, passed it on to someone else. Across winters, across migrations, across generations whose names we will never know, till eventually that chain of knowledge led to us. You're alive today not simply because your ancestors were strong enough to survive, but because they were smart enough to learn, patient enough to teach, flexible enough to change, and sometimes caring enough to keep another person alive for one more day. Perhaps that is the oldest survival method we still use today. Not surviving alone, but there is still one question we haven't answered. Our ancestors could fight the cold. They could turn animal hides into clothing, turn bones into tools, turn fat into light. They could share food, care for the injured, and pass knowledge down through generations. But beyond the circle of firelight, there were still creatures that had evolved to hunt animals roughly our size. Cave lions, hyenas, big cats, bears, and many other predators lived alongside humans for tens of thousands of years. That leads to an even more frightening question: which animal was truly the greatest threat to prehistoric humans? And more importantly, how did our ancestors survive in a world where they weren't always the hunters? That will be our next story. If you want to continue exploring how an animal as physically vulnerable as a human being survived some of the harshest periods in history, subscribe to HistoryInSticks so you don't miss the next video. And before you leave, place yourself in that world one final time. No electricity, no medicine, no supermarket, no modern tools, only the skills you possess right now. If you were sent back to the Ice Age tonight, how long do you think you could survive? 1 day, 1 week, 1 month? Or do you believe you could actually survive until spring? Leave your answer in the comments, because sometimes the best way to understand our ancestors is to ask whether we ourselves could survive in their world.